Usually when I look at a film series, I examine how that series has changed over time, and I will make that video at some point in the future. But for now, I want to discuss the importance of race in the Planet of the Apes. And that's because I've heard the series, or parts of it, referred to as deep political allegory, or on the other hand, as being downright racist. Although the franchise spans many mediums, here I'm just looking at the Planet of the Apes films, which are divided into 3 sections. The original series began in 1968 and lasted for 5 films. However, it was the first that really captured people's imaginations. There was a remake of this first film, directed by Tim Burton in 2001, that although financially successful, somehow never spawned a sequel or 4. Oh, Hollywood, we were so young back then. In 2011, a prequel movie examining how the apes gained their human-like intelligence was released to much acclaim and success at the box office. Rise of the Planet of the Apes is the first in a reboot series currently 3 films strong, with a 4th film already planned. Now, as you might expect, the issues of race have changed from 1968 to 2017. Well, at least a little bit. The original series is widely regarded as an allegory for race and race relations in America, or at least as having race as a central theme.
Right, man is a nuisance. He eats up his food supplies in the forest, then migrates to our green belts and ravages our crops.
The first film, which is based on Pierre Boulez's 1963 novel La Planète des Singes, has Charlton Heston as astronaut George Taylor, who ends up on a mysterious planet where apes are the dominant species, treating the animal-like and mute local humans as lesser species. The twist, and I'm sure it's so famous I'm not sure this can even be called a spoiler, is that it's Earth all along, and this is the future of humankind. Oh dear. Often in racist discourse, black people are called apes or monkeys or are compared to them, and this is the most obvious or the most superficial connection that the film series has with racial issues. But what really matters is that the Planet of the Apes is about one species or one race overthrowing the other, becoming dominant. In the same year that it was released, British politician Enoch Powell said this:
"In 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man."
I wanted to highlight that particular phrase because I think it conveys the sentiment that he was expressing very clearly. So obviously in Britain, but I think more so in the US, there was a fear from some quarters that the ruling class would change from white to black. And I think this fear went hand in hand with the fear that the racial makeup of the majority of the country would change in the same way. A fear not from everywhere, but from enough places for that to be part of artistic consciousness, at least somewhere. This alone might make the Planet of the Apes sound as though it reflects, or was reacting to, concerns that racial demographics were shifting. However, the film doesn't cast all of the ape masters as the same. The characters are complex. Some are sympathetic to Taylor and the other humans. A strong theme of both the first film and really all of the ape films is that of power and its corrupting properties, and how this relates to race, racial segregation, and dominance of one race or species over the other. I think I should say that although the other films in the original series did deal with lots of other issues, the theme of race was very important, and often it was the prime focus. Take a look at these clips from Conquest of the Apes. Very symbolic, but I think it's important for me to say that when looking at any film or any art, if you go seeking symbols, you will find them. And while a lot of the series, as with anything, is open to interpretation, some themes are clearer than others. The second film is very reflective of the fears of a nuclear war. This is how it ends.
In one of the countless billions of galaxies in the universe lies a medium-sized star, and one of its satellites a green and insignificant planet, is now dead.
Which naturally leads into a second sequel, where key ape characters go back to a time when humans still ruled, and find themselves initially welcomed, but then subject to increasing suspicion. The film seems more directly a comment about race and perhaps immigration than the previous two films, with much of the humans' concerns stemming from the fear of an unborn intelligent ape perhaps being the first of many and perhaps ushering in a new order. In that sense, it is similar to the first film, but I think it's more deliberate because it doesn't derive its story from a book. The third film has an awareness gifted to it by the existence of the previous two, and I think the fact that this film is set in the 1970s of our world makes the messaging much more poignant. Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, I think almost indisputably is a reflection of contemporary race riots. The ape born in the previous films, Caesar, is an intelligent ape amongst those who are only conditioned for menial work in a slave-like system. Caesar leads a rebellion, and at the end of the film MacDonald, a sympathiser to the apes played by Harry Rhodes, pleads with Caesar for restraint.
I, a descendant of slaves, am asking you to show humanity.
But I was not born human.
Battle for the Planet of the Apes again deals with group conflict. Caesar realises that apes are as bad in their treatment of humans as humans were in their treatment of apes, which I think is the central idea behind the original series. Apes essentially become humans. They talk like humans and act like humans. And really, what I think that the series was saying was that humans aren't necessarily particularly great, but in that regard, apes and humans are the same. Which may seem a bit negative, but is essentially a message of racial equality. And the end of the original series ends on a hopeful message of humans and apes coexisting peacefully.
Living in friendship, harmony, and at peace. Now, some 600 years after Caesar's death, at least we wait with hope.
The different species of apes, the importance of that and what can be inferred from that, I think is not only open to interpretation, but really quite ambiguous, especially in the remake and the reboot series. I think the idea that orangutans represent this part of society or that gorillas represent this sort of social attitude may touch on the truth, but I think is really a bit of a stretch. Tim Burton's 2001 remake is very like the 1968 film in its story, although it is presented in a campy way that's much more fun than the later reboot series.
Oh, isn't she pretty?
There are differences for sure. The humans here haven't regressed into a primitive state, but are intellectually equal to the apes. It's just they're used as slaves. And I feel the film does bear some similarities to modern-day political situations which do incorporate issues of race.
The human problem cannot be solved by simply throwing money at it.
The government tried that once, and all we got for it was a welfare state that nearly bankrupted us.
I think the city has about as much diversity as I can handle.
I feel, however, that out of all the Apes films, this one is the least political. And I don't think it has anywhere near as much to say about race as it does society in general. With the series reboot, I'd say that there are issues of race, but that those issues don't take centre stage. However, they do exist.
I always think ape better than human. I see now how much like them we are.
However, I'm not sure the sentiment is there just to be a comment on contemporary racial issues, but is rather an incidental comment reflecting the idea presented throughout the series, that we, or humans and apes, are all the same, as bad as each other. Like the original series, I'd argue that the reboot series is very reflective of the times in which it was made, more so than many other franchises. However, I don't think it especially focuses on race, even if race is a part of it. I've heard criticism of this, And while I think the series could have worked just as well if it was a modern-day allegory for oppression in the US or for life as a minority in the US, I would argue that it didn't need to be. As Bob Dylan might say, times they have changed. Racial issues obviously still exist in the United States. However, back in 1968, I think it's fair to say it would have been impossible for Barack Obama to have become the president. The situation has changed. I argued in the past that the 2014 remake of Robocop wasn't really as impactful as it could have been or should have been, because, as well as having many other issues, it didn't get that Robocop was a movie of its time and not easily replicated. The very idea and look of Robocop, even in the remake, is quintessentially 80s. The film reflects the violence plaguing Detroit in the 80s, and although the remake tried to do its own thing in parts, I would argue that it didn't really understand why the original worked so well. I think the producers of the Planet of the Apes reboot series realised very correctly that they couldn't tell the origin story of the Planet of the Apes in the same vein as the original series. And in fact, I think it would have been almost impossible to do so. The story of the Planet of the Apes is timeless, but its handling is quite dated, which isn't a criticism. It was 1968. I know that some people have argued that the reboot series should have dealt with race more, or even that it's racist, because, as I mentioned earlier, it uses apes and chimpanzees as an other, as a different sort of human if you like, and there still exists monkeys or apes as a racial slur. But I think for the films to be compelling stories about the usurping of one people by another, if it's not going to be one group of humans usurping another group of humans, it has to be apes. Parakeet, even with the minds of Einstein, don't have the capacity to rule over humans. No one's going to go and see The Planet of the Cats. Get me Harvey Weinstein. I think watching the reboot, it's clear the films are not about one particular race or group of humans dominating or usurping another. They reflect ideas of social responsibility and cruelty, especially in the first film, where Caesar and other chimpanzees are mistreated. The series reflects social upheaval, mob mentality, and hatred towards specific groups. Yes, you could say that the films show us what racism is. I don't think it's trying to show us what racism to a certain group or from a certain group is like. Whilst I think it's perfectly right that the original series is considered to be reflecting ideas about race, I think in 50 years' time, when people look back at the reboot series, they may talk about race, but I think they'll view them more as reflecting social anxiety in general. Race is important to all of these films, but perhaps not as important as it is to the reputation of the original series. A series which, yes, has messages about race, and often very strong messages, but as with the later movies, also deals with issues of corruption, power, leadership battles, and betrayal. And I think it's probably wrong to take away messages about race in our modern society that these films may convey separately from other themes. There's a lot going on in the Planet of the Apes franchise, and I think a real appeal of these films is that they are often morally complex. But I'm sure there are many different ideas about this, and I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments. As ever, thank you very much for joining me. Next time I'll be making a rare foray into TV land, where I'll be discussing why TV series are seemingly so difficult to end in a way that satisfies their audiences. Don't forget to leave a chimpanzee giving Mark Wahlberg a cheeky thumbs up of a like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.